Hello, and welcome back to the Game Collection. I am SuperDerek, and this is LandStalker. LandStalker, in a word, is really good. Okay, so maybe that's 2 words, but you need at least 2 words to describe the game. I mean, you could also call it very challenging, slightly frustrating, and sadly underappreciated. It's an isometric action RPG with heavy platforming and puzzle-solving elements. Climax Entertainment, the game's developer, is also famous for their work in the Shining Force series. Some members left Climax to form Matrix Software, which worked on well-loved RPGs such as the Alundra series and Dragon Quest V for the Nintendo DS. In LandStalker, you play as a blonde forest elf with a sword and a fairy sidekick named Friday. You explore dungeons, solve puzzles, and discover weapons, magic, and armor that help you complete the dungeons. It's obviously got a lot in common with Zelda games, and that's probably not a coincidence. That said, however, the game does have a unique streak to it. Instead of playing as a silent protagonist, you play as the hero, Nigel, who is a deceptively old treasure hunter who does speak from time to time. Nigel levels up when he acquires heart-shaped jewels called Livestock, which not only increases HP, but his attack power as well. The game originally had a lot of adult themes, but they were cleaned up during the translation. That was pretty common for games of this era, but not quite so much with the Sega Genesis games. Nigel is out to find the treasures of King Noel, an ancient king who got insanely rich by exploiting his people. But he and his treasure mysteriously vanished when his subjects revolted. If you're looking for a deeper plot than that, you may end up disappointed. But if you're looking for some fun quality time with your Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, look no further. I first heard about this game years ago when I was looking up RPGs for the 16-bit consoles that I hadn't yet played through. Because it was on the Sega Genesis, I ended up putting it pretty low on my priority list, but I'm kicking myself for that now. It turns out this is actually one of the best games for the Sega Genesis. LandStalker is pretty challenging at first, since you start off with only a few hit points and even the weakest enemies seem to take a few hits to kill. Even towards the end of the game, it feels like enemies have a much longer reach than you, and as a result, it seems unavoidable that you'll take some damage during regular combat. Luckily, the game is kind enough to allow you to carry up to 9 Ikiki, which is an herb that Friday uses to restore half of your life when you've been knocked out. So despite enemies feeling kind of cheap sometimes, it pretty much balances out. What sometimes is punishing though is the platforming. The isometric nature of the game makes it difficult to judge height and distance of platforms. Sometimes there are visual cues you can use to work off of, but other times you'll be figuring it out through trial and error. Towards the end of the game, missing a jump can mean having to travel back through lengthy parts of the dungeon. Now after this happens 15 to 20 times, you may be tempted to throw your Sega Genesis controller. If you do, make sure you replace it with the Sega Genesis Arcade Power Stick. When walking around, you're constantly pressing diagonally on your D-pad instead of having the 4 directions of the D-pad mapped to one of the 4 directions Nigel can walk. The result is, if you're using a Genesis controller, a very sore thumb. The arcade-style joystick, though, removes this problem almost entirely. LandStalker is pretty long for this style of game, clocking in at around 25 hours for the first playthrough. I highly recommend playing through without a guide your first time. Solving the puzzles in this game feels really good, and I'd hate for a guide to ruin the experience for you. And the replay value is honestly pretty low. A lot of puzzles are easy to remember once you figure them out, and there's nothing like Game Plus mode for you to go back and explore. There are some collectibles out there that are fun to try to find, but you can honestly get by pretty easily without them. LandStalker looks pretty good when you compare it to its contemporaries, especially considering it's on the Sega Genesis, which usually has a tough time keeping pace with the Super Nintendo. I think it even looks a little prettier than Secret of Mana, which came out the year before, though probably not quite as good as Illusion of Gaia, which came out the same year as LandStalker. In the audio department, the Genesis stereo sound comes through really well. While playing LandStalker, you might almost forget for a minute that you're not actually playing a Super Nintendo RPG, and are actually playing a Sega Genesis game because of the high quality graphics and music and sound. Since its release, LandStalker has received a sequel in Japan, not for the Mega Drive but for the Super Famicom, known as Lady Stalker. And Climax Entertainment has also released a game called Dark Savior for the Sega Saturn, which is considered a spiritual successor to this game, whereas Lady Stalker seemed like it had nothing to do with LandStalker. Nigel has also made an appearance in Time Stalkers on the Sega Dreamcast. A remake of LandStalker was planned for the PSP, but was cancelled back in 2005. Fortunately though, the game was released for the Wii Virtual Console in 2007, and was also released on Steam in 2011. Loose copies of LandStalker can be picked up for under $10. I picked mine up for about $8 at a local game shop. LandStalker is criminally forgotten and overlooked during the discussion of 16-bit action RPGs. It's really unfortunate because this game fits in perfectly next to Legend of Zelda and Secret of Mana. Well, I mean, it'd be on another part of the shelf because it's a Sega Genesis and those are Super Nintendo, but you understand my point. It's a really great game and there's really no reason not to get a copy. I mean, it's honestly one of the best games for the Sega Genesis that I've ever played. I'd say it's a must-have for any collector of Sega Genesis games. Not only that, but it's also really easy to come across, so there's absolutely no reason not to own a copy of this game. It's a game that I wish that I had found when I was younger, but I'm older and I'm wiser now, and that's why I'm proud to display it in the game collection.